In this course, I used arts as a means for expression, where I read children's literature for students and then invited them to connect the stories, the experiences of the characters in the stories to their life and express that through artistic means like drawing, like making collages, like writing poems, like making videos. So arts was a means for expression, self-expression in this course.
I'm an author and anthropologist, and I use children's books in order to discuss sensitive issues with both in academic classes and when I do workshops with professionals, and also with groups of immigrants that I work with parents. And I find that the children's books are very effective in encouraging people to talk about issues that are difficult to talk about. My husband came from Ethiopia. He was one of the people who walked from Ethiopia to Sudan in order to get to Israel. So our children are dark-skinned, and I experienced issues with color when they went to preschool. The way I managed to deal with it was to write books for them, which are now used in preschool and in schools to talk about it and to discuss it. And a lot of people think that it's an issue that it's dangerous to talk about because then children become aware of it. And children are aware of it. They're aware of it from about the age of 4. And we need to talk about it, and we need to deal with it in a professional manner, which encourages children to see diversity as a good thing, as a positive thing. For example, these 2 books are very popular books. So one is dealing with the issue of names and the connection between one's name and one's identity and where the name came from and how one gives a name to a child. It's a very big issue for anybody who's undergone immigration, because often people change their names or their names are changed for them. So it enables the discussion about the whole issue of names and identity. And this book is a book I originally wrote for my eldest son when he was in preschool, and it deals with the issue of color and how does one cope with the issue of color, which usually comes up at the sort of preschool age when kids become aware of differences between children.
So this course connects beautifully with your course. It also uses children's literature on refugees and immigrants' lives and challenges and journeys. And I used it also as a springboard for students to talk about their own life, their challenges, the journeys they've taken in their lives, and to connect it with their realities. So the first story I want to share is a story about an immigrant, a Korean immigrant to the United States who faced difficulties with others mispronouncing her name. And I asked students to put themselves in the shoes of this character and think how she feels, what she wonders, what she thinks about. And they made this I am poem as if they were in the character's place, and they wrote I am, I feel. That was good for identification with the character in the story. I also used another book with a refugee from Sudan, I think, who also spoke about the significance of the name for him and the difficulties he found in America with people mispronouncing his name. Then I brought the poem Where I Am From that I sent to you, a few videos of what students recorded that speaks about our history, our culture, our background, and what makes us. This is what actually makes us. And I asked students to write about their own, where they are from. So they wrote Where I Am From poem. I am from olive trees. I'm from hide and seek. I'm from all these childhood memories and past and present. So they made it artistic. Some of them made it artistic. Some of them videotaped it.
I find that this is an unusual medium for students who are used to a frontal lecture. When one divides them into groups, and I give each group a different children's book with an assignment, which is basically to read the book and to discuss a certain issue, which is generally connected with belonging, identity, some kind of conflict between parents and children, where the parents are generally the immigrants and the children were born in Israel. Those types of issues, the issue of color. Most of my books are about Ethiopian immigrants or the experiences of Ethiopian immigrants and their children in Israel. People who are immigrants themselves can definitely identify with the issues that come up in the books. And people who are not immigrants themselves, it raises empathy for the experiences that immigrants go through. I think especially, for example, raising issues about color, which is something that people find it difficult to talk about. And I think it is an issue and it needs to be talked about. And the children's books create a safe space to talk about it, because you can talk about the characters in the book, you can identify with the story, you can empathize, and you don't necessarily have to talk about yourself. And if you want to talk about yourself and you want to take it to a personal level, then it's easier to do so. And it generally creates very interesting discussions. I use my own children's books, but it's possible, obviously, to use all kinds of books. There are lots of texts that are relevant. I use the text according to what I'm trying to work on or what I'm trying to bring up, and who the audience is, who the students are, what's relevant to them. For example, I teach, sometimes it's social workers, sometimes it's teachers, sometimes it's psychologists. So with each different group of people, I would choose a slightly different text, possibly, depending on the purpose of the course. It's really a children's book, but it's a metaphor about a tree moving from from the place where it was planted to another place, and how it's difficult for the tree and the whole process of the change, and then the tree discovers that the flowers that are growing in the new place are different from the ones that it used to have, and it shakes its branches to get rid of them, and they fall on the ground. But then the tree is very miserable for having all its branches fallen on the ground, and the tree basically eventually picks them up again and looks after them. So this is about expectations that parents have of children. On the one hand, it's a children's book. On the other hand, I use it with parents to talk about problems between parents and children, which is not unique to immigrants. It's especially relevant to immigrants, I think, because they're bringing their children up in a different place from where they grew up, and that usually creates all sorts of issues. But obviously, it's also relevant to anybody who's bringing up children who don't necessarily turn out the way one might want or expect or imagine. So one always needs to deal with the difference between the fantasy and the reality.
There are two books here, Azi in Between, about a refugee from Syria who moved to Europe, and Crow Boy is about a Japanese boy who is in the social periphery. He's Japanese. He didn't immigrate or migrate. He's in his country, but still he feels not part of the main culture because he's poor, a poor boy. He's dressed with rough old clothes. So it's also about being in the center or the periphery. So here also I use this technique called think, ink, pair and share, where students could think about where they are, where they feel they are in present. Think about it, then share with each other, and then share with the whole group. So we did this activity where students stood in the room wherever they see themselves. This technique that Yuchai used in the workshop in Gothenburg. So students, most of them stood not in the center. They stood on the sides. They felt that they're more in the periphery. One of the stories that uses art actually in the illustrations is called Stepping Stones, where the illustrator uses pebbles in all the illustrations. He makes drawings out of pebbles. So this story is also read in Arabic, written in Arabic and English on the same page. So it's good also for use in, with students who can't speak English very well, Arab students. First of all, I brought some pebbles to class. I asked students to write on each pebble something that annoys them and they want to get rid of. So they wrote some different words like fear of darkness or death or something like this. And they threw the stones to try to get rid of these hardships. And then I asked them the story is about a journey that the immigrant makes from her home country in search for a safe haven. So I asked students to draw a journey, not write, but draw a journey they took in their lives. So, for example, this student drew a journey where she used to think with her heart, and now she thinks she thinks more with her mind. So the journey between the heart and the mind, which is beautifully illustrated here. Another student drew a journey resembling the seed that grows up and keeps developing and becomes more fruitful. So she saw her life as developing experiences throughout the life journey. The last story I'd like to share is The Other Side. This is an American story about the segregation between the African American and the whites, where there's a wall, a fence, and people can't cross this fence. So I asked them to draw a fence they want to, or a wall that they feel in their life there's a wall and they want to cross. They want to cross to the other side. They want to overcome this barrier that they have. So they drew beautiful things, a barrier like a national barrier, individual barrier, a woman who wants to develop and can't. So different barriers that they wanted to cross. And they illustrated this beautifully using arts. And I discovered that there are artists in the class, especially students who didn't speak up. In the previous year when I taught them, they were so quiet, they didn't participate. They spoke to each other, but they never spoke. They disturbed, but they never spoke and were active participants in the classroom. And suddenly I found that they have so much to say. The last part was using photography, which is part of arts. And it connects to the community where students get out from the classroom and take photos of things they want to change in their communities. So they use photography, they reflect on their communities, they think about ways to change these problems in their community. So they talked about things like smoking, like social issues, environmental issues, political issues. So yeah, this was one example of photo voice. This was another example, parking space problems, potholes in street, poor infrastructure in Arab villages, garbage, environment, responsible parents in education. They started going to schools and they found how parents don't care for their children anymore. traffic jams, different issues, that the overpriced life in Israel. So they reflected on different issues in their communities through photography and through written reflection and then presentation.
So here another two books that I use. So one is called The Lion Hunter's Son. So it's about a family who emigrate from Ethiopia to Israel, and the father is a lion hunter, and the son, who is born in Israel, does not really appreciate what his father did in Ethiopia, and they have a lot of conflict between them, which I address in the book by having the son tell some of the chapters are through the eyes of the son, and some of the chapters are through the eyes of the father, so that when you read the book, you see both perspectives. And this is a book called The Rainbow Child, which is about a child facing her mixed identity. She was born in Israel, her mother came from Ethiopia, her father came from America. And when she goes to a new school, she presents herself as American because it seems more prestigious than presenting herself as Ethiopian or half Ethiopian. So it's about the legitimacy of a complex identity, and that you don't have to denounce any part of one's identity in order to be accepted in society. Most classrooms are very heterogeneous, and a lot of teachers don't get enough training on how to cope with issues that come up that are to do with identity or color in the classroom. So I would use these ideas with people who are training to be teachers, and also social workers. A lot of social workers maybe think that you have to be of the same identity of the person that you're treating in order to be able to understand their issues. But that's a big question. Maybe you don't. Maybe everybody can relate to everybody else if they can just be culturally sensitive and not prejudiced or biased. So these are all issues that we talk about in class.